Welcome, dear listeners, to a journey through time and the human heart. Today we're going to travel to the year 1882, when the golden dust of the American Old West still danced with the winds of freedom, and brave hearts wrote their stories with tears of courage and smiles of hope. This is the story of Eleanor and Samuel, two souls who found in the vast horizon of the American frontier something more precious than gold, true love, and the strength to rebuild their lives. Before we begin this exciting adventure, tell me in the comments, from what city are you watching us? I'd love to know where each of you who will live this story with me comes from. And don't forget to leave your like on this video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of our stories that touch the soul. Dry Stone, New Mexico Territory, Autumn 1882. The October sun painted Dry Stone with tones of copper and melancholy when Eleanor Whitfield descended from the train with barely a worn leather suitcase and the dress she wore. Her delicate fingers, accustomed to Boston silks, trembled not from the morning cold, but from the weight of the decision she had made. At 19 years old, Eleanor had left behind her family's golden salons, the rose perfume of her father's garden, and the promises of a marriage that would suffocate her soul like a corset, too tightly laced. Charles Whitmore III, her arranged fiancé, was a competent businessman, but his eyes held the coldness of marble statues that decorated the Whitfield mansion. Dry Stone's railroad station exhaled aromas of leather, honest sweat, and desperate dreams. Eleanor drew the dry air into her lungs, feeling for the first time in her life the taste of true freedom, bitter and sweet like the first drops of rain after a long drought. Ruth MacDonald, the local boarding house owner, observed the young woman with experienced eyes that had already seen much pain and courage during her years as a nurse in the Civil War. There was something in the girl's erect posture, in her chin lifted against the wind, that reminded her of soldiers' wives who departed without guarantee of return. "Work, is that what you're looking for?" asked Ruth, her voice laden with maternal understanding. Eleanor nodded, swallowing pride like bitter but necessary medicine. "There's a ranch 15 miles from here. The owner needs someone to care for the house and help with chores. Samuel Garrett. He's a difficult man, but fair." The name sounded in Eleanor's ears like a promise or a threat. She still didn't know which. But what Eleanor didn't know was that her arrival at that lost ranch would change not only her destiny, but would also awaken a heart that for years had remained closed, like a tomb. Clear Waters Ranch stretched like a sea of golden grass under the infinite sky of the American West. Samuel Garrett, at 32 years old, had calloused hands that told stories of war and hard work, and blue eyes that kept secrets like deep wells under moonlight. William O'Connor, the Irish foreman with fire-colored hair, led Eleanor along the packed dirt path that led to the main house. The horse's hooves marked the rhythm of her accelerated heart, while she observed that broad-shouldered man repairing a fence with precise and economical movements. Samuel raised his eyes when the visitors approached. His face was marked by the sun and by something deeper, a melancholy that time's rains had not managed to erase. He wore the simple clothes of a rancher, but his posture still carried the military authority of battlefields where he had left pieces of his youth. "Mr. Garrett," said Will with his melodious accent, "this is Eleanor Whitfield, the young lady Ruth mentioned." Samuel wiped his hands with a piece of cloth, studying the young woman with the same attention he used to evaluate cattle during weaning season. Eleanor felt naked under that gaze, as if he could read her story just by observing how her fingers nervously gripped the suitcase handle. "Work begins at dawn," he said finally, his voice deep like the echo of distant thunder. "There's no place for delicacy in this land. If you're running from something, make sure you possess enough strength to build something new." Eleanor raised her chin, her green eyes shining with determination. "I'm not running, Mr. Garrett. I'm choosing." An almost smile crossed the rancher's lips, quick as a bird crossing the sky. But Samuel carried scars that Eleanor couldn't yet see, scars that would make her not just an employee, but the thread capable of sewing together again the shattered pieces of a wounded heart. The first days at the ranch were like an initiation through fire. Eleanor woke before sunrise, when the air still held the night's coldness, and stars seemed like forgotten diamonds in the dark velvet of the sky. Her hands, accustomed to holding fans and porcelain cups, now held water buckets, heavy brooms, and washing boards. The sixth day brought a humiliation that burned in her cheeks, like the tears she refused to shed. Carrying supplies for the miners working in the nearby hills, Eleanor stumbled in the hardened mud, scattering beans and flour across the thirsty earth. Samuel appeared like a severe shadow against the golden afternoon light. "A city lady doesn't survive where men die," he said, his words cutting deeper than any blade. Eleanor rose slowly, cleaning the dirt from her bloodied hands. The smell of earth mixed with the blood from her palms created a strange, primitive fragrance that spoke to something ancient in her soul. "I'm not going anywhere, Captain," she replied, using the military title she had heard Will mention. "This land can try to break me, but it will discover I'm made of more resistant material than I appear." For a moment, Samuel studied her in silence. He had seen men break under less pressure on battlefields, and something in the way she held her head high awakened an almost forgotten memory of admiration. That night, Eleanor sat on the porch of the employee's house, watching the stars while tending her wounds. The wind brought the perfume of blooming cacti and the distant sound of coyotes singing their ancestral song. For the first time since arriving, she felt she belonged somewhere. But what Eleanor didn't know was that Samuel was watching her from his window, seeing in the lamplight something he hadn't seen for 4 years. The promise that some hearts are too strong to let themselves be broken. The order came on a November morning, when the cutting air announced winter's arrival. Samuel determined that Will should teach Eleanor to ride and shoot, essential skills for anyone living on that frontier, where civilization still fought against the wild. While Eleanor learned to read horses' temperament through touch and gaze, Will told her the story that Samuel kept locked in his chest like a poisoned thorn. "Catherine was her name," murmured the Irishman, while adjusting the reins in Eleanor's hands. "Hair like ripe wheat and laughter like running water. She died defending this ranch while Samuel was on a frontier patrol 4 years ago." Eleanor understood then that Samuel's coldness wasn't cruelty, but the armor a man builds around his heart when pain becomes too great to bear. Each brusque gesture, each cutting word, was actually a silent plea. "Don't make me feel again." Attacks by Apache renegades had increased since precious minerals were discovered in the nearby hills. The gold and silver that made white men's eyes shine were sacred veins in the earth that natives considered their ancestral mother. When Eleanor pressed the trigger for the first time, the rifle's recoil pushed her backward, but she maintained balance. Samuel observed from afar, noting the instinctive precision that surprised even Will. "My father taught me in secret," explained Eleanor, reloading the weapon with movements that revealed hidden familiarity. "He said a woman should know how to protect herself, even if society considered it improper." That confession created between them the first thread of a connection that would grow like ivy, slowly, silently, until it became impossible to tear away. December's new moon brought with it a darkness that seemed painted with black ink. It was in this absolute darkness that renegades preferred to attack, emerging from shadows like malignant spirits born from wounded earth. Eleanor awoke to the sound of horses' hooves and war cries that echoed like banshee wails. Through the window she saw flames licking the barn where they stored winter hay. Her heart raced, but her mind remained clear as spring water. Samuel was protecting the cattle when the lance pierced his shoulder, opening a gash that dripped blood onto dry earth. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She ran across the flaming yard, dragging him to the safety of the main house, while bullets whistled around them like furious wasps. She took the repeating rifle Samuel kept above the fireplace and positioned herself at the window. Each shot was calculated, precise, born from a deadly calm she didn't know she possessed. The attackers, surprised by organized resistance, retreated to the shadows from which they had emerged. When silence returned, only the crackling of flames and Samuel's heavy breathing filled the night. Eleanor tore her own skirt to make bandages, her hands working efficiently while stopping the bleeding. "You saved my life," murmured Samuel, his eyes meeting hers in the golden lamplight. "And you saved mine when you gave me a home," she replied simply. In that moment, something changed between them. The invisible barrier Samuel had built began to develop its first cracks, like ice under spring sun. But that night of violence and courage would be just the first step in a journey that would test not only their physical strength, but the capacity of two wounded hearts to open themselves again to love. The telegraph's arrival in Dry Stone in early 1883 brought with it echoes of the civilized world Eleanor had left behind. The first messages that crossed copper wires carried news from Boston, where her family still searched for their lost daughter. It was also through those wires that 5 men arrived on sweaty horses, with eyes hard as flint. Mexican bandits searching for buried treasure, following maps scribbled on yellowed papers and stories told in smoke-filled cantinas. Samuel faced them in the ranch yard with the silent authority he had learned commanding soldiers in war. There was no bravado in his posture, only the unshakable certainty of a man protecting what was his. "This land is under my protection," he said, his hand resting naturally on his pistol grip. "Whatever gold you seek went to town long ago." Eleanor watched from the porch, admiring how Samuel commanded respect without needing to raise his voice. The bandits, perceiving they faced not a common rancher but an experienced veteran, opted to seek fortune in less defended lands. That afternoon, while repairing damage from the previous attack, Eleanor worked beside Samuel in companionable silence. They passed tools without words, anticipating each other's needs like dancers following music only they could hear. "You learned quickly," Samuel commented, watching her nail boards with precision. "I had a good teacher," Eleanor replied, and for the first time he truly smiled, a smile that transformed his face like sunrise transforms landscape. But echoes of Eleanor's past would soon arrive not through telegraph wires, but in the form of a man determined to reclaim what he considered his by right. Spring arrived at Clear Waters Ranch like a promise whispered by the wind. Wildflowers painted the fields violet and yellow, and the stream that gave the property its name sang its eternal song over polished stones. It was on one of those nights perfumed by wildflowers that Eleanor and Samuel walked to the stream's edge after a day of shared work. The full moon transformed running water into liquid silver, and the air was impregnated with the sweet aroma of blooming cacti. Samuel stopped. An ambush on the road to Silver Creek had revealed something he could no longer deny. The fear of losing Eleanor had become greater than the fear of loving again. "You make me feel alive again," he confessed, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. "For 4 years my heart has been buried with Catherine, but you brought back spring." Eleanor gently touched the wound on his shoulder, which she herself had tended with careful and precise hands. "Scars don't disappear, Samuel, but they can become part of a new story," she murmured. When he kissed her for the first time, it was with the reverence of a man who had learned to value precious moments. The kiss tasted of unshed tears and finally permitted promises. The stars witnessed that first moment of true surrender, when two wounded souls found in each other's courage the strength to begin again. But Eleanor's past was about to catch up with her, in the form of a man who would cross entire territories to reclaim what he considered his property. The train that arrived in Dry Stone on a May morning brought more than mail and supplies. Charles Whitmore III descended from the locomotive, with 2 broad-shouldered men with cold eyes, his impeccable clothing contrasting with the station's red dust. At 26 years old, Charles possessed the quiet arrogance of men born with everything given. His face had the artificial beauty of a marble statue, perfect but soulless. Eleanor felt her stomach turn when she saw him through Ruth's boarding house window. "Eleanor, my dear," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I came to take you home. Your father is very worried, and I'm willing to forgive this youthful adventure." The encounter occurred on Dry Stone's main street, under the merciless midday sun. Samuel appeared like a silent storm, his presence filling the space between Eleanor and Charles like a protective wall. "Miss Whitfield is free to make her own decisions," said Samuel, his voice carrying the authority of one who had commanded men in battle. Charles studied Samuel with the contempt of one who saw frontier inhabitants as barely domesticated savages. "Captain Garrett, I imagine," he said, revealing he had informed himself before coming. "My future father-in-law, Senator Whitfield, has great influence in Washington. It would be a shame if legal problems befell your property." The threat floated in the air like the smell of gunpowder before thunder. But Charles Whitmore had underestimated both the strength of a woman who chose her own destiny and the determination of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. The revelation came in a whispered conversation under the stars, when Eleanor finally told Samuel the whole truth about her origin. Daughter of one of Boston's greatest textile industrialists, heiress to a fortune that could buy entire territories, she had chosen dignified poverty over suffocating wealth. Samuel listened in silence, his calloused hands holding hers with infinite tenderness. "It changes nothing," he said simply. "You're the woman who bled to build this ranch with me, not the girl who fled from a palace." The Pinkerton detectives arrived with dawn, hard men with legal warrants and loaded pistols. But something extraordinary happened. The ranch workers, cowboys, freed ex-slaves, Irish and Mexican immigrants formed a silent line between the detectives and the main house. Will O'Connor spoke for all of them. "Mrs. Eleanor is our boss now. Any problem with her is our problem." The gunfight that followed was brief and decisive. The detectives, accustomed to dealing with isolated fugitives, didn't expect to face a united community. 2 of them fell wounded, and the others retreated, understanding they had encountered more resistance than expected. That night, while caring for the wounded, Eleanor understood she had found not just a home, but a chosen family, united not by blood, but by mutual respect and earned loyalty. And when news of the events reached Boston newspapers, something unexpected happened. Public opinion began to change, seeing in Eleanor's story not a scandal, but a symbol of courage and feminine independence. The change in political winds arrived through telegraph wires like an unexpected blessing. Boston newspapers, which began by reporting the Whitfield scandal, gradually transformed Eleanor into a frontier heroine, symbol of the new American woman who chose her own destiny. Eleanor's father, Henry Whitfield, a practical man above all, understood that insisting on bringing his daughter back would be a costly political mistake. Charles Whitmore III, for his part, quickly transferred his romantic interests to a railroad heiress, whose father offered better business opportunities. The circuit judge who arrived in the region in June brought with him the possibility of legal union that Samuel and Eleanor desired. The ceremony took place on a golden Sunday, on the main house porch, with blue mountains as silent witnesses. Eleanor wore a simple white cotton dress she had sewn herself, adorned only with wildflowers gathered that morning. Samuel looked impressive in his best suit, hair combed with pomade and eyes shining with happiness that seemed to illuminate his entire face. "Do you take this man as your husband to love and honor in wealth and poverty, in sickness and health?" asked the judge. "I do," replied Eleanor, her voice clear as spring water. The kiss that sealed their union tasted of fulfilled promises and possible futures. The honeymoon in San Antonio was the first time Eleanor traveled as a free woman, not as her father's property or a rebel in flight, but as the beloved wife of a man who respected her. And when they returned to the ranch at summer's end, Eleanor carried with her not only happy memories, but also a new life growing in her womb. Spring of 1884 brought with it the sweetest miracle Clearwater's ranch had ever witnessed. Grace Catherine Garrett was born on an April morning, when peach trees were laden with flowers and the air smelled of fulfilled promises. The birth was attended by Mexican midwife Maria Santos, a wise woman whose hands had brought hundreds of children into the world. Samuel paced back and forth during the long hours of labor, his silent prayers mixed with the perfume of cactus flowers that bloomed only once a year. When Maria finally placed the girl in his arms, Samuel cried for the first time since Catherine's death, tears of joy that washed away years of accumulated pain and guilt. "Catherine would have adored her," he murmured against the silky hair of his newborn daughter. Eleanor, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband rock their daughter with the infinite tenderness of a man who had learned to value precious moments. Jacob Miller, a Confederate veteran who had lost his right hand at Antietam, joined the ranch that same year. Despite political differences he'd had with Samuel during the war, the 2 men discovered that the frontier had a way of healing old wounds and creating new loyalties. The ranch prospered under Samuel and Eleanor's joint administration. Contracts for cattle supply to railroad camps brought modest but steady prosperity, and the reputation for honesty and quality of Clearwater's ranch products spread throughout the territory. But happiness, as Eleanor had learned, was a treasure that needed constant protection against the storms life inevitably brought. Years passed like leaves carried by wind, each bringing its own joys and challenges. Grace grew like a desert wildflower, resilient, beautiful, and perfectly adapted to her surrounding environment. At 3 years old, she already spoke English, Spanish, and some Apache words learned from the Mexican cowboys who adored her. The year 1887 brought a terrible test when a cholera epidemic swept the region like a malevolent wind. Grace, then 8 years old, was among the first to fall ill, and for entire weeks Eleanor didn't leave her side, bathing her daughter's feverish brow and offering desperate prayers to silent heavens. Samuel built an improvised sanctuary in the chapel they had erected on the ranch, where he spent hours kneeling, asking that life allow him to keep his greatest joy. The epidemic took many, but Grace fought with the same stubbornness she had inherited from her mother and the quiet strength that was her father's legacy. When the fever finally broke on a September morning, Grace looked at her parents with clear eyes and made her first adult life decision. "When I grow up, I'm going to be a nurse like Mama was for me." The harsh winter of 1888 brought snowstorms that isolated the ranch for weeks. Jacob Miller, who had become not just an employee but a true family friend, died peacefully during one of those storms, as if he had chosen to depart when the earth was covered in white and everything seemed clean and new. But even in the sadness of loss, the Garrett family discovered that true love doesn't diminish when divided. It only multiplies, creating ever-widening circles of affection and protection. In 1895, when Grace turned 18, Clearwater's Ranch had transformed into a landmark of progress and prosperity in the region. The arrival of permanent telegraph lines and the first official school marked the transition from wild frontier to established civilization. Dr. Benjamin Hayes arrived with the train that brought materials for school construction. Recently graduated from the University of Chicago Medical School, he came to establish a clinic in the growing town of Drystone. Tall, dark-haired, and with gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, Benjamin was immediately fascinated by young Grace, who demonstrated surprising medical knowledge for someone her age. "She learned by caring for the ranch's wounded and sick," explained Eleanor with maternal pride. "She has healing hands and a compassionate heart." The courtship between Grace and Benjamin was conducted with the propriety of the era, but any attentive observer could see true love blooming between them. Samuel, now 45, watched his daughter with a mixture of pride and melancholy. Pride at seeing her choose a good man, melancholy knowing she would soon leave to build her own life. The wedding was celebrated on a golden spring day, with the entire community present. Grace wore the lace veil Eleanor had saved from her own wedding, and her eyes shone with the same determination that had marked her mother's steps. When the newlyweds departed to establish the clinic in town, Samuel took Eleanor's hand and murmured, "We raised someone who will make a difference in the world." But what they didn't know was that Grace's greatest gift was yet to come, a new generation that would bring renewal and hope to the ranch that had been built with so much love and sacrifice. The new century arrived at Clearwater's Ranch, like a promise of continuity and transformation. Samuel, now 50, saw in the grandchildren Grace gave him proof that every struggle had been worthwhile. Eleanor, at 42, maintained the same natural elegance, though her hair showed silver strands that gleamed like polished silver under the sun. The ranch had become more than rural property. It was a symbol of hope for all who arrived in the region seeking new opportunities. Ex-slaves, European immigrants, war veterans who needed to start over, all found at Clearwater's Ranch not just work, but a home where a person's value was measured by character and effort, not by origin. Samuel developed heart problems after years of hard work under the West's merciless sun, but faced physical limitations with the same dignity he had faced all other life challenges. On a golden spring afternoon, while watching grandchildren play in the yard where they themselves had once fought renegades, Samuel took Eleanor's hand and spoke words she would keep in her heart forever. "You gave me a life I never thought I deserved. You transformed this place from a ranch into a true family." Eleanor squeezed their intertwined fingers, observing how his hands, still strong despite age, told the entire story of their life together. Each scar was a memory. Each callus was proof of honest work and dedicated love. "We built something greater than ourselves," she replied. "We built a home where love can grow free like wildflowers." When the sun set that day, painting the sky with every shade of pink and gold that existed in the world, Eleanor knew she had found true happiness, not the easy happiness of fairy tales, but happiness conquered through brave choices, hard work, and persistent love. Clearwater's Ranch would continue to prosper for generations, an eternal testament that two determined people can create miracles when they refuse to give up on their dreams and each other. And on clear nights, when wind blew gently across the fields, visitors swore they could hear echoes of ancient laughter and whispers of eternal promises, as if love itself had chosen that land to make its permanent home.